Welcome to the International Progressive MS Alliance webcast of the Digital Tools Workshop being held here in Philadelphia in the United States. We're very excited to bring together experts from different aspects of the field of digital tool development. We've had an excellent 2 days where we've heard from different patient advocates as well as scientists and clinicians about what are the key emerging principles for being able to develop, evaluate, and disseminate clinically meaningful tools. We'd like to thank our sponsors for this event, which included Sanofi and Genentech. And I am Jennifer Graves, Professor of Neuroscience from University of California, San Diego, and co-chair of this Digital Tools Workshop. I'd like to welcome my colleagues here to this webcast. If you wouldn't mind starting off with an introduction of who you are and how you come to this Digital Tools Workshop.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Beth Gromish. I'm a research neuropsychologist at the Mandel Center for Multiple Sclerosis in Hartford, Connecticut in the United States. And I do work developing digital tools to improve interventions and screening for cognition for people with multiple sclerosis.
My name's Vanessa Fanning. I live in Canberra, Australia. I'm the chair of the engagement coordination team of the people affected by MS in the Alliance. I've been involved with the Alliance for the last 5 years, and our role in the engagement coordination team is to bring our lived experience expertise to the work of the Alliance.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Stefan Gold. I'm at the Telemedicine Center in Berlin, Germany. Our work focuses on mental health in multiple sclerosis, particularly depression, but also related symptoms like fatigue and cognitive problems. And one key area of what we're doing is trying to develop and then evaluate in clinical trials novel, remotely delivered behavioral interventions to help people manage these symptoms.
Well, so far, my takeaways from this workshop is there is a lot of exciting things happening in the landscape of digital tools and multiple sclerosis. And I think it's giving all of us some hope that we will have an outcome measure that will let us speed up clinical trials and hopefully deliver more efficacious therapies to people living with progressive MS. So while there is this excitement and I think a great opportunity to have a big impact on the field, there are things that have emerged from our discussions that are key to making this successful. One of those keys is user experience and making sure that the tools we develop are truly meeting the needs of people living with progressive MS. What are your perspectives on the key elements of the user experience that will make this effort successful?
So with user-centered design, anything that we're developing, whether it's an outcome measure, an intervention, we really need to think about who our end users are. So people with MS. If we don't design something that they want to use as them as stakeholders, we're not developing anything that's worthwhile. So it's really crucial that people with lived experience are involved in the development team at every stage, telling us exactly what do they want in this program, what does it look like to them, how do they interact with it, and getting feedback at every stage and listening to that feedback and incorporating that.
Thank you. Vanessa, what are your thoughts about the biggest promise of the digital tool landscape, and what do you want all of us to remember, both patients, doctors, and scientists trying to create these tools?
Well, I think Beth has just said it. It's incredibly important that people with lived experience be involved from the very start of the development of a digital tool. And we're talking about wearables or apps that people might use to manage their MS. And it's very important that people with lived experience be involved at the very start. Is this actually something that we want to measure? So we need to be asked what's important to us, what information are we looking for to help manage our own MS and to help manage our relationship with our clinicians, whether it be a neurologist or a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist. We engage with a lot of clinicians, and digital tools can be very valuable in providing the information that we need to validate what we know is happening in our MS.
I think that's so important, that what we're trying to achieve with these digital tools is something that is sensitive enough and specific enough to match with the patient lived experience. And I think that's where the power and the potential comes, because our patients know when they're progressing faster than our current techniques pick it up. And that means we're missing the mark on being able to target that progression with treatments and being able to respond to it. So my expertise has been in trying to track the progression with digital tools and wearable, but Dr. Gold, you've also had experience in using these tools to intervene on the process rather than just watch it. Would you like to make comments on what your hope is for the next few years in digital therapeutics?
Yes, I think that's an important point. So there are different tools being in development. One group that is sort of helping us to track, maybe also predict trajectories over time, development over time, that enables both people living with multiple sclerosis, but also the healthcare providers to get a more realistic, more comprehensive picture of what's going on. That's part of it, and that's really important. But I think these tools also have the possibility of delivering tools, skills, and other options for people living with MS to actually help them manage what's going on and maybe also improve symptoms, possibly even more than just symptoms. And I think somewhat was mentioned before, which is so the user experience and the suitability for the user is for interventions at least as important as the tools that are tracking and measuring. And I think what's important to keep in mind is that digital tools offer a unique possibility, one for remote delivery, so removing some barriers that people might have. So we all know mobility could be an issue. We all know that fatigue or other symptoms could get in the way of typical healthcare provided in office face-to-face, requires traveling and all that. So some of these tools or aspects of these tools can help overcome these barriers, but also offer on top of that management for the symptoms. But for that, it's important that people using them can tailor them to their specific needs. And I think that's something where the digital technology can come in handy, that you're not going through things that you don't need or that are not being helpful, that you can pick and choose the elements that apply to your specific situation. And there's something where the digital nature of these things can dramatically improve not only usability, but also suitability for the specific needs of any particular person living with multiple sclerosis.
Excellent. Another theme that has emerged from the last few days is the concept that there really needs to be a marriage between industry and academia. We need the fast pace of what can happen in the commercial market. We need to be up to date on what's available technologically, but there are some strengths of the way we do things in academia, which is rigor, making sure there's validity, that we go through all the steps, that it has clinical meaningfulness. What, from your different perspectives, do you think is the most important in trying to bridge these gaps, take a large-scale effort to bring these tools to people living with MS faster, and that combination of having a device have a commercial-like quality in terms of its comfort level, its responsiveness to what the consumer wants, but also having that rigor in the background and have the data be able to be used by people who can study the utility and the validity? Any thoughts on how we make this happen?
Well, I think, so the one thing that we have to look at, we want speed, but we also want quality and safety, right? And I think we have a long tradition of developing medical interventions of all types and shapes and sizes. What's new here is not only the speed of trying to get to the patient, but also the speed by which the technology evolves, right? So it's an opportunity, but also raises a whole lot of new issues that we didn't have to deal with when we're looking at drug development or at psychotherapy or at rehab, because the underlying technology is evolving at a speed that's hard to keep up with. So if we want to make sure that these things are safe and effective, which is obviously a key issue, in a way we have to reinvent a new system, and we're moving on a moving target. So I think all the players that are involved, be that industry, be that academia, be that regulators, be that healthcare providers, be that payers, have to adjust to this new world of a very different nature of interventions or tracking tools. And I think that's really the key challenge that nobody can solve these problems by themselves. So this can only be tackled by fostering new collaborations across the space that brings everybody in the process at the very beginning, not at the end when we're trying to deliver something which is then overtaken by the evolution of technology in the background. So I think this is a bit of a challenge where we do need these large collaborative platforms or marketplaces of exchange as provided by the Progressive MS Alliance.
Do you have any thoughts from the patient perspective?
Yes, well, I totally agree with what you say, that the rigor needs to be there, the evidence needs to be reliable. We need to know that what is being collected and processed and correlated with biomarkers or medicine or treatment, we need to know that that information is very soundly based. But the message that I really wanted to get across to this meeting, and I think it was very well received and well taken, is that people living with progressive MS face enormous challenges in their day-to-day life. Living with MS is a full-time job, and people with progressive MS suffer from debilitating fatigue and have very limited time in their day. Sometimes there are cognitive issues, sometimes there are issues of concentration. So the digital tools that are going to be best adopted by people living with progressive MS are ones that require minimal effort and don't impose a burden on the user. And so I spoke a bit and others spoke about the burden versus value equation. People are willing to make a commitment and to do something that may require a bit of time and effort if they can see the value, if they're getting something that is valuable to them, valuable information, information that will help them manage their condition, and that is really critical. And you're only going to find that out. Researchers and app developers, digital tool developers are only going to find that out if they seek the views and incorporate the views of people living with MS right from the very start and throughout the process.
Dr. Grommish, do you have thoughts on this partnership?
I think having larger collaborations is fantastic because it gives us an opportunity to hear different perspectives. You know, hearing from people in different areas what barriers they have, what do they need to make something workable for them. Because if we just focus on one area of where we're working, we can miss a whole wider network of users and really incorporating their needs into the product.
So another theme that has emerged is that MS is so multidimensional in how it affects people, from their thinking to their walking to many forms of function. And we're seeing tools develop to try to address different of these needs. Given the limited time and space and the desire for an early win and progress in the digital tool field, what are your thoughts on pushing forward on all fronts and creating a true menu of items that patients and providers could choose from for digital options, versus trying to encourage the field to narrow down for a few early wins, let's say in a cognitive area, mood area, or in walking? What is your perspective? Push forward all fronts, pick a few early wins to have the field focus on. There's pros and cons to both. Any thoughts? We'll start with you.
I think that's difficult because I think I see both sides of it. But I do think the early wins can be a great place for us to start. There were some fantastic presentations this week of what are high priorities for people living with progressive MS, like mood, like cognition, like mobility. So I think those are great targets to start with, and really a way for us to expand for digital tools for people with MS and seeing what works for people, where do we still need to improve, and building out from there.
Vanessa, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. It's a difficult balance, and it is important to have both, I think. But early wins have a lot of appeal, and I was very excited by the idea that I think it might have been you who expressed that imagine a world where we've got digital tools that are so effective in measuring the outcomes of whatever treatment or intervention is being trialed, that we may have a clinical trial that needs only 6 months to provide the evidence rather than 3 to 6 years. So if we can get some early wins, possibly in the field of mobility, because there are already some exciting tools in the pipeline, I think that would be really a huge breakthrough for people with progressive MS.
Dr. Gold, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think obviously this is not an either-or question. It's really, if anything, a sequence or a matter of focus. And I think one thing where I always think you have the biggest chance of creating impact soon is the areas where you have the biggest synergy. And I think synergy is particularly likely in the area of outcome measures. Mobility would be one of the things, because it's not only helpful for developing digital tools, it's also developing for new medicines. It's also developing for all kinds of other interventions. There might even be synergy across other medical indications within neurology or further out. So I think that is an area where you could create the biggest momentum and have the biggest spreading impact on different aspects. So getting something developed jointly that would be accepted from a regulatory perspective, that could shorten clinical trials for all types of interventions, particularly in progressive MS, but not only in progressive MS, in other neurological diseases, maybe in other forms of MS. So I think from an international point of view, that would be, I'm not sure if it's going to be an early win. I'm not sure if it's going to be early and or a win, but it's certainly something that would be extremely impactful if successful. Whereas some of these interventions, they have very specific paths towards implementation. They might be country specific, they might be intervention specific, they might be content specific, they might be culturally specific. So it's a bit harder to get this type of synergy, but this could then ride on the wave of something like a new mobility endpoint that is helpful for observational studies, for interventional studies of any type within progressive MS and beyond. And I think that would be something that would be really worthwhile putting our first major push behind.
I think that's a really interesting concept. What could be done more uniformly around the world versus what maybe has to happen locally in our different environments. I'm very curious from the last 2 days, what for you was the most striking and maybe new piece of information that you hadn't thought of before or didn't know about that you might have learned over the last 2 days at the workshop? We'll start with Vanessa.
I would come back to the suggestion that I just referred to, that with digital tools, we may actually have measurements that are so powerful that we'll be able to conduct an effective clinical trial and get a meaningful result in a matter of months rather than years. I think that is incredibly exciting, because people with progressive MS have a deep sense of urgency. We're living with a progressive condition. It is progressing every day, and it's progressing inexorably, and that's a very difficult thing to live with. So if there's something that can speed things up and get meaningful results from a clinical trial, that would be great. And, we are pretty frustrated with some of the current measurements, such as the EDSS, which we know isn't really telling us much about what we know is going on in our bodies.
Thank you for those comments. And I just want to follow up and say you made some really great points during the workshop about making sure we have the right balance of burden and perception of value. And one thing I wanted to follow up on is, at the moment, we're using these tools largely to monitor. But if these tools, through clinical trials, as you just described, can speed it up so that we get a higher potency drug against progressive MS, do you see that value proposition changing? Meaning, if you're using the tools then to follow the efficacy of that new drug, would you be willing? We heard from the patient-reported outcome presentation, we have about 12 minutes per week for patients to be able to do active tests. Would that increase to 30 minutes a week if it was in response, if you were monitoring in response to a new drug that was helping you?
I think without a doubt. That's if there's a possibility that there's a treatment out there, whether it's a drug or some other kind of intervention that can really change my quality of life, perhaps even reverse symptoms, then I think people won't hesitate to put in that time. It's really the Holy Grail.
And Dr. Gold, your thoughts, a new or exciting thing you heard the last 2 days?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting when you go to these meetings and the topic is digital tools and you work on one very specific type of digital tool. Sometimes you have the impression that that's a digital tool. So I think in a way it's really eye-opening and refreshing to see what the different shapes and sizes under this umbrella of digital tools could be and what implications and applications could be for the work that you're doing, or maybe that you're not yet doing, in terms of really trying to go from the research setting into a clinical practice. And I think there's a lot of perspectives I've heard over the last 2 days. Most of them I anticipated, not all of them. I think it's really nice to see that the lived experience voice is so strong and also so succinct in a certain way in these with very clear visions of what should be happening, that because I think that helps the other players in the field a lot of recalibrating on what they're trying to do. But it's also what I found maybe surprising to a certain extent is that even though these tools are all very different, they have different purposes, they have different aims and targets, there seem to be a common set of problems and barriers of getting them from where they are today to where they should be tomorrow or yesterday, probably. And I think that is something that requires this kind of broad umbrella of a topic to, if you don't know what the barriers are, you're not sure how to remove them. And if you can identify common barriers, that's even better because it'll help a lot of the areas in that field of research.
And the flip side to those common barriers could be common facilitators. So perhaps we raise the water levels simultaneously for a number of technologies with the introduction of a common platform or a shared governance structure where we can be developing these tools in parallel and in communication, and maybe that'll raise the water level faster. Dr. Gramish. Oh, Vanessa, you wanted to respond.
Oh, well, I was just wanting to touch on something exciting that I heard, and that is something that doesn't come within the context of a wearable or some of the things you typically think of as digital tools, because big data, artificial intelligence comes up when you talk about digital tools. And the work that's being done now with artificial intelligence and big data crunching, going through 70-odd thousand MRIs, is coming up with some really startling and meaningful information, which is really going to transform treatment in the future, I think. So that is really exciting. And the best thing about it is that it's using MRIs that we've already subjected ourselves to, and we don't have to do anything.
Repurposing data can be very ethical. It can be helpful to use as much as we can from what's already been given by patients.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Gramish, what's been the most new and exciting for you?
I think I'm really excited about the potential of wearable devices and passive data collection to be a way to get valuable information and track patients when they can't come to the clinic. You know, some people aren't able to see their provider for a whole year, and there's a lot that can change during that time. So that kind of digital tool can be really valuable to improve communication. But we still have the barrier of how does the provider get that information and how do they interpret it? So we still have some ways to go, but I think there's been a lot of things proposed of where we can go next and really expand that market.
And then I'd like to ask the panel, is there any other final message of hope and promise about the coming world of digital tools and MS? For me, I'm very excited. I think the marriage of what people experience with progressive MS with these monitoring tools will help us push forward the therapeutics. I think it's actually critical to be able to develop high efficacy therapies for progressive MS. Any final message?
I would say it's fantastic that we have people with lived experience playing such a large role in these development digital tools, because now we're making something that's really going to be meaningful and have an impact on people's lives.
My message to my peers who live with progressive MS would be digital tools might sound complicated and scary, but actually, if you think about it, you're probably already using quite a few digital tools in your daily life. And I think the people who are developing these new directions are aware of the challenges we face and will incorporate that into their design. And I think it offers really significant opportunities for better quality of life and better management of our condition if we go down this track. So I'm excited.
So I think another aspect that's really exciting about digital technology is that it's changing so fast that you're not sure what tomorrow's promise will be or even tomorrow's challenge. So I think my hope is, I don't know what the promise, which way it's going to go, because it's so fast and it's changing so rapidly. But what I do know is that if we find a way of collaboratively dealing with these promises and also the challenges, this will apply to the next and the next and the next as well. So I think this experience of sort of working across these different groups to tackle the challenges that are in front of us now and realizing the promises of these tools will prove helpful no matter which way the technology is moving. So I think that's something that will be really helpful for the field. That makes me excited to work in this area.
Well, thank you all for joining me and for joining us in this digital tools workshop. We're grateful to the International Progressive MS Alliance, and we look forward to a 21st century of digital tools for people living with progressive MS.